Michael's the CEO of Infinigraph. He's got 19 years of experience in internet collaboration technology. He's had 3 different startups that had to do with big data. We talked about semantic data earlier, so big data and linked data are obviously 2 of those synonyms thrown around this morning. Chase has had case studies featured in Facebook Marketing Secrets and Social Media Analysis book. He's been included in Marketing Circle's Hall of Fame on Media, also Fast Tech 50 for his first and latest company. Infinigraph is an engagement and performance platform. He's going to tell you a little bit about what he does, a little bit about his company, and a whole bunch of other stuff. So let's give him a big round of applause.
Thank you, Stuart. It's always a great time, right around 2 o'clock. Somebody keep it really fresh and exciting and interactive, because I know our blood is right now. I don't think anyone, a little bit of regurgitation, because we've all hit the high buzz points, and I'm sure we're buzzed over the low. But the reality is a marketer today is really fighting the blind. They're fighting the blind to get attention from their customers. And it's a massive problem if you think about it, because a consumer today is getting flooded with choices of information. And I'm sure these are very familiar with everyone in the room, especially if you're a marketer, but there's a paid, owned, and earned world. And in the past, it was very siloed. And at any given moment, one of these sites, one of these conduits of media distribution would have something that would go pop. It would be hot. The problem is that unless you were able to see what was happening across all these mediums, it was very difficult to then really communicate to your audience, hey, this is what's happening now. And I don't think anyone here would argue that the new URL is social. I don't think there's a media publication. Matter of fact, you'd be stupid to not have something social share function baked onto your content today. And why would you not want someone to share your content? So not only did that become the new URL, but it changed how marketers were looking at and interacting with consumers, really like never before. So we moved from this siloed world to a many-to-many. I mean, as a matter of fact, I think a case in point, everyone that I'm speaking right now is buried in their computers communicating with someone else. We're multitasking freaks. And I'm only getting maybe a 2% of your attention. And so this shift, and I've noticed that a lot of people are using shift. Because I've heard this word at least 10 times today. But we've shifted from a keyword world to an interest graph world. And one of our primary discovery points is our feeds. I'm not going to even poll this audience on how many people are on Twitter and Facebook, because that'd be stupid. Everybody is. I mean, this audience is very unique. But the reality is not everyone is on that, but it's going global. So the fact that how I discover content is really in your feed, no longer in your search. And for a marketer, how are they going to have a competitive weapon in really understanding what their audience is doing? And that was that shift I'm talking about. What's exciting is now we have context. We have context of what a person is actually interacting with. And that's a huge deal. So now we're seeing this melding in the world. And the media properties you see around on the edges here all have integrated social on them. So now we can start measuring behavior and intent at the industry level. And I'm going to talk specifically about why is it so important. Because the social graph is really a mess. I don't think anyone here would argue if you go onto Google and you were to type in cancer or any other keyword, you get back a mess. But reality is there's niche sites of content which are very specific to their context. So if you're able to organize those and bring those together in very verticalized industries, and I'm going to talk about an actual case study with TCBY, but if you're able to verticalize these actual industries specifically, so let's take all the automotive, all the healthcare, or all the apparel, or retail, or airlines. They're really working super hard to create great content themselves. By organizing that to structured vertical industries, that allows for you to extract context of what's trending at that industry level. And that's a really important factor. Because, and this is a phenomenon that's only happened in the last couple of years. So not only looking at industry trends allows you to then determine what is effective. If I'm a brand and I'm in this vertical industry, I want to know and compare my content effectiveness compared to what's happening at the industry level. If you're not doing that, you're really developing in the blind. So let's take those blinders off. Second part is programming. Everyone here has a calendar. We live our lives on calendars. Well, guess what? The media properties and publications, they have calendars. And there's not a marketer, and if you're out there, you'll agree with me, we're always struggling and saying, what should we put in our feed? Or what kind of content is going to resonate with my audience to get traction? And at the end of the day, and I think several conversations we're talking about, we're using social to drive traffic to our site to create transactions. Boom, that's the bottom line. And then behavioral analytics. So the exciting part, and why I got this business, is I saw this coming 3 years ago. I saw this fact that not only can we verticalize these industries, but really for the first time we can start measuring and putting what we call a trend score on each piece of content and start really measuring its velocity. And that was huge because now we're able to say, okay, I'm in a specific industry, and I'm going to let off my slide, sorry. But and now we can extract context. This visualization is really powerful, and I want to impress upon this that the majority of people are not mentioning brand names anymore. Think about it. How many times do you guys mention a brand name? But you're acting on content which is relevant to an industry. And that's a very powerful distinction. And this graph here shows, and for some of us that are a little bit older and then younger, the reality is that there were warehouses of data everywhere we touch today. And now we're creating this enormity of information. And I don't think there's any platform on the planet that's yet to figure out all of this simultaneously. However, one of the clear distinctions here is that each and every one of these sources that's creating and spewing out called digital exhaust, has context. So if you organize that, that becomes actually the $50 billion business. And I'm sure you guys have seen some of the publications about business analytics and how big that market really is. So this is actually part of, if you go on our YouTube channel, /Impenegraph, there's a whole case study behind this where our client was able to describe their process. So this is one slide of like 5. But literally, understanding your audience requires you to understand what they're doing with context and content at the industry level. And that is an incredible, important factor because all the insights and behavioral connections to that content can be now tapped. Because a consumer that is liking and sharing and clicking and retweeting, that's a powerful methodology of saying, wow, someone's took or actually a comment which is even more powerful, they've taken the time to do something with content, and the fact that you know where it's coming from, the domain, now you can start applying that to a vertical industry. And anyone gets $20 that can count how many times it's a vertical industry. So going through the critical analysis, it's sort of shocking, but there's still this day and age where people are still doing gut-based intuition marketing. And if you're not basing your content creation and your content planning based upon data that is relevant to your audience, you're going to get yourself fired at some point. Because if somebody's going to ask you, where'd you come up with this? And it's happening at a clip now. And I'm seeing brands actually going back to their agencies and making them accountable. So without data, support your premise is a very dangerous position to be in. Then you start looking at the whole brand filtering aspect, and then the strategy. The strategy really is, tell me what's working. If you knew what was functionally working across an industry, that's going to be your open gate to saying, I know that this audience composition over on the right side or the left side, they were saying this is relevant and was working. So your indication of determining what you should be programming or potentially curating or copying is very high because you already have a valid point of saying these people have said, this audience composition has said it's working for them. So, taking your company, your brand, your media property, there is no question you have competitors. As a matter of fact, there's a lot of different content sources which are appealing to your same audience composition. If you're not segmenting those and then really extracting out the thematics, you're missing out on what your audience is telling you specifically by their actions is what's relevant to them. And today, the consumer is at the center of conversation. Brands are having harder and harder to speak to their customers. And if they don't look at what they're acting on, they're going to miss a huge opportunity, which is the actual engagement side of this equation. So content calendars. I just want to poll here. Who here in the group is maintaining and managing a calendar? They're tough. You've got product releases, schedules, you're obviously curating, and who's curating up to 50% of content? Well, you'd be shocked that some brands are so vehemently against curation. They're scared of it. They feel that they have to create everything themselves. Brands cannot afford to create the amount of content that consumers could consume, nor the problem, and the reason why I'm so excited about curation is that it allows you to be the voice of an industry. Because your consumer doesn't have time to go out there and bring together all the sources that are relevant. But if you can cherry pick that content and then start distributing it to your channel, that's a very big deal. So crowdsourcing. And so one of the things that we do, and I'm not going to get too much on the vendor pump, but we literally break down the context and content by the type. There's optimization components, but then getting it down to the actual thematics. So a brand manager can say, well, what was performing a visualization? And then before they even go to their agency and say, hey, we want to create this, they can actually say, well, here are the 10 visual items that were photos or videos or certain types of physical posts that were performing the best. So now they have a guide to knowing what's relevant on the days and time, which is huge. So this is really exciting. So now the fact that your consumers are acting on a huge amount of content, you're not the only person speaking to your customer or communicating. And a lot of brands don't realize that. They're still in this myopic world that they're the center of the universe, and that's just not the case. So here's a great visualization of what we call interest. Everyone here has acted on some form of content. You've shared, you've liked, you've retweeted. Well, guess what? If you cross-connect that at scale, that creates an interest graph. Now, Facebook actually has a tool, if you spend enough money with them, I think $200,000, you can get access to these types of like graphs. Like graphs, I think, are not that great, because if someone liked something 2 years ago but never went back to the content, that's pretty useless. So what we're doing is actually looking at specifically how much content interaction each brand obtains. So this is a high-end fashion brand we did a project for, looking for what were the top content sources that were most relevant to that audience based upon the behavior. And you can see we follow the digital breadcrumb going from to net quarter. So literally, you can imagine going 4, 5, 6 degrees down. Now you actually have a long tail of interest. Well, imagine how much content is coming from each one of these sources. It's enormous. Now, if you're able to score it, rank it, you really got something. So now you have true behavioral analytics at scale around interests that our consumers are actually telling you specifically. So we came up with a word called hypercuration. There's so many different forms of curation across there, but when we started working with brands and seeing what they were trying to accomplish, at the end of the day, they don't have time. They don't have time to filter through. They don't have time. As a matter of fact, one of my pet peeves about social monitoring is that to create complex query structures takes a scientist. Who here uses social monitoring? Are you doing it yourself?
post